You are listening to Classical Music Giants. Today we stand beside Johann Sebastian Bach, 1685-1750.
He stands at once like a mountain and like a map, a summit that later composers would measure themselves against, and a chart of how contrapuntal lines, faith, craft, and curiosity can be braided into something that makes time feel shared. Johann Sebastian Bach did not arrive fully formed as the universal genius of modern imagination. He was born into a family of musicians, trained by church and town, sharpened by journeys and jobs, and shaped by an unshakable devotion to both technique and meaning. If you have ever felt the world steady under you when 2 or 3 melodies finally meet, you have felt something of Bach's gift. Picture northern Germany at the turn of the 18th century. It is a mosaic of duchies and principalities, each with its own court, chapel, and appetite for spectacle. Music is woven into daily life. Bells, chorales, dances, ceremonial brass, the organ's reverberant presence in the church. Amid this, a young boy in Eisenach learns the violin, the harpsichord, and the organ as if they were languages. His first teachers are family, his father, a town musician, and after tragedy, other relatives in a broad musical kinship. The Baroque world into which he is born prizes ornateness and order, but it also prizes clarity and rhetorical force. Bach absorbs all of this and then turns it into an architecture of sound. Bach's career is built piece by piece like a careful house. He spends his 20s moving from post to post, Arnstadt, Mühlhausen, and making a pilgrimage to hear the great Diederik Buxtehude in Lübeck, a journey that leaves him dazzled by the organist's improvisatory power. He then secures an appointment in Weimar, where his reputation as an organ virtuoso and composer grows. It is a period of experimentation, chorales and organ works, cantatas and early pieces that show his appetite for rigorous development. From Weimar, he moves to the court at Cöthen, where the demand for sacred riches is lighter and the appetite for instrumental brilliance is greater. There, in service to Prince Leopold, Bach writes some of the most intimate and exuberant pages in the entire repertoire. The Brandenburg Concertos, suites for orchestra, the solo cello suites, sonatas and partitas for violin, works that flank technique with sheer joy. Finally, in 1723, Bach accepts what will be his most enduring appointment, Thomas Cantor in Leipzig. He is appointed to lead music at St. Thomas Church and to teach at its school. It is a demanding job. He must supervise services, compose cantatas to fit the liturgical year, teach, train choir boys, and keep up with civic duties. Leipzig is not always courting his genius. It is practical, bureaucratic, and sometimes petty. Yet here Bach writes the bulk of his sacred music, the great passions, the Mass in B minor assembled not as a commission, but as an act of vocation, and sundry secular works as well. Life is not easy. He loses his first wife, Maria Barbara, and remarries Anna Magdalena, a soprano who becomes an essential collaborator and copyist. He fathers many children, 20 by some counts, and though many die young, several who survive, notably Carl Philipp Emanuel and Johann Christian, will carry his ideas into a new musical age. What did Bach set out to do artistically? He sought mastery, but mastery for him was never mere exercise. It was devotional, intellectual, and playful. He was obsessed with counterpoint, the art of weaving independent musical lines, and with the fugue, where a simple subject can be transformed by inversion, augmentation, diminution, and permutation until the music seems to generate itself. His command of harmony is not just functional, it is inventive. He uses dissonance and resolution as rhetorical tools, the way a preacher uses pauses and emphasis. He loved modes and keys, and he was fascinated by temperament, by how tuning systems make certain keys sing and others sound different. He explored every key in the well-tempered clavier, 2 books of preludes and fugues that are textbooks and love letters both. You can open them almost anywhere and find a world of contrapuntal possibilities, of modulations that feel inevitable, of lessons in voice leading and in the expressive power of a simple harmonic choice. There are works that mark moments of broad human reach. The St. Matthew Passion is one. It is not only a liturgical setting of the Passion. It is theater, commentary, lament, and consolation all at once. It juxtaposes arias and choruses, the narrative of the evangelist, the crowd of the turba, and an inner chorus of reflection that pulls the listener into moral complicity and spiritual examination. The Mass in B minor feels like a lifetime offered in sound, a large-scale synthesis of his sacred craft, combining learned counterpoint with the liturgical urgency of the Mass text. The Brandenburg Concertos are a manifesto of instrumental color, odd combinations of instruments, serendipitous textures, a celebration of what happened when soloists conversed with an orchestra and when dance forms were lofted into high conversation. Then there are the late works where Bach seems both exhausted and inexhaustible. The art of fugue, a labyrinth of contrapuntal skill, maps fugue after fugue with a mathematician's clarity and a poet's sense of mystery. It is left unfinished on his death, and that unfinishedness has its own poignancy, a brilliant mind still working against the limits of time. The musical offering, arising from a visit to the court of Frederick the Great, is a set of canons and ricercars built on a single theme the king supplied. It reads as a dialogue between sovereign and musician, a puckish but profound set of puzzles and musical jokes. And the Goldberg variations, whether conceived as ornamented variations for a patron's insomnia or as a private set of meditations, become in performance a vast landscape where technical difficulty is married to affection, wit, and spiritual seriousness. Bach also wrote vast numbers of cantatas, hundreds if you count the fragmentary and lost pieces that once cared for the liturgies of Leipzig's churches. These cantatas are among the composer's most immediate gifts to his parishioners, musical sermons in miniature. Every Sunday he produced works to fit the readings of the day, responding not abstractly, but with music that served a congregation, teaching as much as it thrilled. That practical side of Bach is crucial to understanding him. He was not a solitary genius spinning ivory towers. He was a craftsman. He made things to be used. His manuscripts bear neat corrections and the marks of a man who wrote with a purpose, to teach, to worship, to please patrons, and to push the boundaries of what music could say. And he wrote like that too. Annotations on many manuscripts read, Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone the glory. This was not a platitude. It shows a theological posture, a humility that is paradoxical given the complexity and authority of his music. Bach's Lutheran faith did not make his music simple or narrow. It gave him a horizon of meaning. His chorales, those short hymn tunes, are the anchor of countless movements. They appear as cantus firmus in fugues, as closing stanzas of cantatas, as the backbone of organ preludes. They tie his technical brilliance to congregational life and to devotional immediacy. There are human stories within the man's life. He could be both fiercely practical and intensely playful. Early in his career, he walked many miles to hear a great organist and return with a deeper sense of what the instrument could do. He was a widely respected organist known for improvisation. He taught with the clerical thoroughness of someone who thought good technique was the beginning of music, not the end. He kept notebooks for students and household collections, Anna Magdalena's notebook among them, where simple minuets sit next to exercises and arrangements. He doted on his children musically. The house was an ongoing studio, a place where apprenticeships were family work. And yet Bach's reputation was complicated after his death. He died in 1750, and tastes were changing. The Rococo and gallant styles, the classical emphasis on clear melody and elegant sentence structure, took center stage. Bach's dense counterpoint struck some as old-fashioned. For decades, his works were studied by composers and theorists as models of craft, but they were not always performed for audiences as we now perform them. The revival was slow and deliberate. Felix Mendelssohn's landmark 1829 performance of the St. Matthew Passion in Berlin is often credited with bringing Bach back to broad public attention. A romantic composer and conductor recognizing in Bach a spiritual and musical seriousness that answered the 19th century's hunger for depth. From that point, his works entered the public imagination more fully, celebrated by Mendelssohn, Brahms, and later by musicians who saw in them both the roots of their own practices and the challenge to think differently about order and expression. Why does Bach matter today? Practically, almost every musician learns him. The well-tempered clavier is a staple of keyboard education. His chorales are standard texts in harmony classes. His partitas and violin works are ritual training for string players. But beyond pedagogy, there is the deeper claim. Bach remodels how we think about musical architecture. He teaches that a single theme can generate an entire cosmos, that an economy of motives becomes a universe when handled with invention. For composers, that is a lesson in how constraint can become freedom. For listeners, the revelation is emotional. Bach's most technical passages are often also his most tender. His music finds ways to make rules sound like revelations. We honor Bach not by putting him on a pedestal, but by entering his work and letting it change how we listen. The explosion of historically informed performance in the 20th century reshaped our perceptions. Musicians began to play on gut strings, with smaller ensembles, and with Baroque pitch and ornamentation, choices that return the music to its probable acoustic world. At the same time, there is room for creative reinvention. Pianists perform Bach's keyboard works on the modern piano, bringing a certain tonal gravitas. Orchestras expand textures. Electronic musicians sample and loop his motives into new genres. He is both ancient and modern, a canonical figure, and a wellspring for experimentation. The moral and cultural weight of Bach's life is subtle. He was not a political radical. He worked within the structures of church and court, sometimes clashing with them, sometimes thriving. Yet his music has an ethical dimension. It commands attention, demands labor, and rewards patience. It teaches devotion to craft where the craft is not merely technique, but conversation. Between lines, between human beings, between the finite and the infinite. People in crisis have found solace in the slow, inexorable progress of a fugue. People seeking joy have found it in a vivacious concerto grosso. There is a democratic element too. Bach wrote for princes, but he also wrote chorales for congregations and simple minuet-like pieces for his children. He understood that high art and domestic music-making are not mutually exclusive. Scholars still debate aspects of his life and work. Did he intend the art of fugue to be played on specific instruments? Was the toccata and fugue in D minor written by him or added to the canon later? These questions remind us that the history of music is not a single tale, but a field of inquiry. New manuscripts surface, attributions are reassessed, and performance practice continues to evolve. The art of interpreting Bach remains lively, because his music resists complacency. The more you learn, the more it yields or surprises. The legacy of Bach's sons is also a legacy of contradiction. They carried his rigorous craftsmanship into new stylistic directions. C.P.E. Bach, for instance, becomes a leader in the Empfindsamer style, an idiom that prizes sudden contrasts and expressive freedom, paving the way to the classical era. Others take different routes. The family's musical imprint spreads across courts and churches, and with it goes a persistent idea that music is a craft worth perfecting. Bach's music also serves as a kind of lingua franca between epochs. When Dmitri Shostakovich cites Bach, or when jazz musicians improvise over a Bach chorale, there is an acknowledgement across timelines. These are materials sturdy enough to be reshaped without losing their identity. His contrapuntal logic is not a relic, it is a system of thought that can be repurposed. Minimalist composers have found in Bach's repetitive, processual elements a distant cousin. Film composers have borrowed his gravitas to evoke seriousness or spirituality. Popular artists sample his motifs to add an instant sense of classical weight. None of this is appropriation without reciprocity. It is testimony to the enduring versatility of his material. Listening to Bach is, for many, an ethical exercise. It trains attention. A fugue requires concentrated hearing, because independent lines weave at different rates, sometimes imitating, sometimes contradicting. The best listening is active. It is a choice to follow threads and see how they intersect. That exercise has broader cultural benefits in an age of distraction. Bach asks us to listen slowly, to hear consequence and design. At the same time, he rewards casual entry. There are visceral pleasures in a Goldberg aria's opening flourish, or in the immediate drama of a chorale harmonized with surprising dissonance. His music can sit in a soundtrack, be studied in a conservatory, or be felt in a crowded worship service. There is nuance to his moral portrait. He could be demanding, even difficult, as colleagues attest. He argued with employers over wages and titles, seeking both recognition and the means to sustain his family. He could be particular, preparing scores with meticulous care. Yet he was also playful. His canons and riddles are evidence of a mind that loved puzzles for their own sake. Imagine the man in a dim Leipzig study, composing a crab canon that reads the same forwards and backwards, smiling at the ingenuity. That joy matters. It complicates any myth of Bach as an austere religious fanatic or an ivory tower theoretician. He was all of those things: the faithful craftsman, the manic exemplar of discipline, the witty contrapuntalist, the devoted father and husband, and the proud servant of the church and of melody. Consider the example of the Brandenburg Concertos, presented as a set of 6 concerti grossi to the Margrave of Brandenburg. They read like a compositional lover's note to possibility. Each concerto explores different instrumental combinations and effects. The 5th concerto gives the harpsichord an expanded solo role that looks forward to the keyboard concerto as a genre. The 3rd concerto's string textures are riotous and compact, and the overall set reads like a compendium of instrumental inventiveness. It's as if Bach took every instrumental conversation he loved and set the terms for their ultimate argument. Or consider the well-tempered clavier. For students, it is a curriculum. For performers, it is a testing ground of expressive possibilities. For listeners, it is a tour of affective states that never feels contrived. In each prelude and fugue, there is a miniature drama, a harmonic question set in motion, a subject that insists, a counter-subject that resists, resolutions that surprise. It's music that rewards both analysis and surrendered listening, which is why it persists in pedagogical books and late-night playlists. And what about his organ music? The toccata and fugue in D minor, whether wholly his or not, has become a cultural emblem of dramatic Gothic intensity, its opening gesture like a throat clearing before a theological sermon. His organ preludes, chorale settings, and passacaglias are not merely technical showpieces. They are sermons in tone, capable of lifting a congregation into contemplation or stirring a solitary listener's heart. Bach's influence extends into the very grammar of Western music. His voice-leading solutions, his modulation strategies, his use of sequence and pedal points have been studied and imitated for centuries. The textbooks of harmony and counterpoint borrow his chorales as primary illustrations. To train a composer in tonal thinking without encountering Bach is like training a poet without rhyme or syntax. He provides a long demonstration of how to balance unity and variety, repetition and invention. Yet perhaps the most compelling reason to come back to Bach is his humane insistence that mastery should serve expression. He did not write complexity for its own sake. Even his most intricate fugues contain humanity, sighs of dissonance, sudden rays of consonance, lines that lean like voices in a conversation. His music is, at bottom, about relationships, between melody and accompaniment, between soloist and ensemble, between composer and listener. It models a way of being in the world, rigorous, generous, curious. Today, Bach sits at an intersection of scholarship and popular culture. New editions of his works are constantly produced. Scholars examine his scribal habits, the provenance of manuscripts, the dating of compositions. Performers argue about tempi, ornamentation, and ensemble size. Recordings proliferate to the point that one can hear a single cantata in 12 different interpretations across a lifetime. Technology makes Bach portable. You can listen to the St. Matthew Passion on a subway and still be moved. But technology also invites us to deepen our listening. A streamed performance is not, in itself, a substitution for attention. Bach's best reward comes when you let the lines work on you, when you follow a fugue subject as if it were a conversation you are privileged to overhear. And there is still fresh territory. Composers today write Bach-inspired works that interrogate what counterpoint might mean in an age of digital abundance. Improvisers, jazz pianists, for example, find in his harmonic progressions a launching pad for fresh invention. Electronic artists sample his motifs. folding them into entirely new contexts. This is not a diminishment of Bach. It is a proof of relevance. His materials survive because they are adaptable. So what do we take away? If you are new to Bach, begin with curiosity. Listen to a single work more than once. Try the gentle arc of a cantata, where recitative speaks and aria replies. Sit with a movement of the Mass in B minor and notice how themes recur like family faces at a reunion. If you play an instrument, learn one of the preludes and fillet it for study. Identify the subject. Look for the points of imitation. Watch how the harmony changes shape. If you are a listener, accept that sometimes knowledge deepens pleasure. Learning the chorale tune hidden inside a fugue changes how you feel the music's closure. But also, give yourself permission to be moved without explanation. Bach's music speaks on multiple levels. It asks for attention and repays it with beauty. His life reminds us that genius can grow out of obligation as much as inspiration. So many of Bach's pieces were born from commissions, from teaching assignments, from the need to fill a Sunday service. His discipline was not a constraint that boxed him in. It was the crucible that made him inventive. He teaches a model of work that is patient and exacting, one that believes craftsmanship is a form of respect for performers, for listeners, and for the medium itself. When you think about Bach in the modern world, think in pluralities. He is academic and popular, domestic and monumental, devotional and playful. He is a man of his time who somehow speaks across time. In the distorted mirror of history, he is sometimes mythologized as a solitary genius. The truth is richer. He was a teacher, a church musician, a family man, a perfectionist, and a tinkerer. His music gives us something both rare and human, the sense that order can be beautiful and that beauty can be ordered. There are practical ways to experience him anew. Attend a live performance, preferably in an acoustically resonant church. The organ and chorus in the right space can make a Bach cantata feel like light through stained glass. Explore recordings that represent different historical perspectives, from the lushism of 19th century interpretation to the lean clarity of period ensembles. Read a little history as you listen. Knowing the liturgical calendar can illuminate why certain cantatas sound like admonitions and others like celebrations. And if you play, let him teach you. His manuscripts are full of lessons not just for fingers but for musical thought. Finally, let Bach's life be a consolation. He wrote amid limited means, immense responsibility and personal grief. He trusted that the act of making, of patiently refining melodic lines, of teaching chorales, of producing works to feed a town's liturgy, mattered. In an era when attention is fractured and mastery is sometimes devalued as mere technique, his example is a counter-argument, that depth, care, and fidelity to craft can change how people feel and think. He shows us that complexity can be humane, and that sacred seriousness can coexist with domestic delight. For those reasons, and for the astonishing beauty of his sound, his music remains a common inheritance, a map and a mountain both. Thank you for listening to this episode of Classical Music for Beginners. In our next stage, we will turn from a man rooted in Lutheran Germany to a fellow 1685-born master whose roads ran through Handel's international courts and operatic theaters, tracing how different responses to power, patronage, and public taste shaped two giants of the Baroque. Reflect on Bach as someone who converted duty into art and precision into prayer. Produced by Selenius Media. Music by The Artificial Laboratory. Word count 4510.
You have been listening to Classical Music Giants. Today, we stood with Johann Sebastian Bach, 1685-1750. Join us next time.